The smarter you are, the more exhausted you probably are. And I can prove it, overthinking isn't a flaw. It's actually a survival system, but it's running in the wrong century. If you've ever rehearsed an argument for a fight that never happened, this video is going to explain a lot about you. Here's something almost nobody talks about. The people who worry most about saying the wrong thing are usually the ones who say the most careful, considered things. The people who lie awake replaying a conversation from 3 days ago often understood that conversation more deeply than anyone else in the room. The people most exhausted by their own minds? Very often, the sharpest minds in the building. That's the paradox nobody hands you. You'd expect the most cognitively gifted people to have some internal peace and some quiet competence that comes from knowing how to think well. But it works exactly backwards, because the same capacity that lets you see 12 moves ahead in a conversation, that lets you anticipate someone's needs before they've named them, that catches every subtle shift in a room's energy. That capacity never, ever turns off, and that's where the exhaustion lives. Not in the doing. In the endless, relentless 2 a.m. thinking. You know what that looks like from the inside. You finish a conversation and it's over for everyone else in the room. For you, it's just beginning. You're replaying the moment you paused too long before answering, wondering if they noticed, wondering what they made of it, running a parallel version where you said something different, sharper, kinder, clearer, and watching how the whole thing unfolds differently from there. And then another version, and then another. The conversation ended 20 minutes ago and you are still in it, alone, building alternate timelines that no one else knows exist. That's not anxiety in the clinical sense. That's not weakness. That is a brain running exactly the program it was designed to run. At full capacity, in a context where full capacity isn't what's needed. So let's talk about what's physically happening in your brain when this occurs, because understanding the mechanism changes how you see yourself. When your brain isn't focused on a specific external task, it activates something called the default mode network, a set of regions responsible for self-referential thinking, imagining the future, replaying the past, modeling other people's minds. For most people, the default mode network is a background hum, active but quiet. For overthinkers, it's a full orchestra that never gets the signal to stop tuning. Here's why. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for planning, consequence mapping, and social reasoning, is disproportionately active in people who overthink. This creates a system that's extraordinarily good at anticipation, but that has no natural off switch. The signal that tells most nervous systems this problem is resolved, you can rest now. Overthinkers either don't receive it, or they receive it and immediately generate a new problem to fill the gap. Because rest, to this kind of brain, can feel genuinely unsafe, like a gap in the perimeter. And this matters because it means the exhaustion isn't coming from something going wrong. It's coming from something working over time. Your brain hasn't malfunctioned, it's doing exactly what it learned to do. The question is just, why did it learn to do this in the first place? Nobody is born an overthinker in a vacuum. This traces back, almost always, to an environment where outcomes were hard to predict. Not necessarily a traumatic one, sometimes just an unpredictable one. A parent whose moods shifted without clear reason. A household where love was present but conditional in ways you couldn't fully map. A dynamic where the right answer changed depending on context you couldn't read. In those environments, a young nervous system learns a very logical survival strategy. Think ahead. Model every scenario. Build the argument before the fight. Because if you can predict what's coming, you can prepare. And preparation is the only control available to someone who can't control their environment. That was smart then. That was genuinely adaptive. The problem is the body doesn't file that away as a childhood strategy. It files it as how the world works. And so 20, 30 years later, that same nervous system is still scanning, still anticipating, still building arguments for fights that probably won't happen. Still carrying the cognitive load of an environment that no longer exists. The code is old, the context has changed, but the program is still running. And here's what makes that so difficult to see clearly. The program feels like you, it feels like your personality, your conscientiousness, your care. It doesn't announce itself as a leftover survival strategy. It just feels like how you are. like the way you naturally move through the world, which is exactly why so many overthinkers spend years trying to fix something that was never broken, just misapplied. Here's where it gets important to make a distinction, because not all overthinking is the same. Type 1, reflective rumination. This is where you genuinely process something. You think it through, find insight, reach resolution. This is actually a strength, the capacity to sit with something difficult, turn it over carefully, extract meaning from experience. That's not pathological, that's depth. Research consistently links this kind of thinking to higher emotional intelligence and stronger empathy. Type 2, brooding rumination. This is the loop, the 2 a.m. spiral. You're going over the same ground for the 40th time, feeling like you're almost there. One more pass will finally close it, and then somehow you're back at the beginning. Here's the cruel part, and it's neurologically fascinating. The loop itself releases small amounts of dopamine. Your brain is rewarding you for thinking more. The system is self-reinforcing. You keep looping because the loop feels just barely like progress. But it isn't. That's the illusion. And the only way out of it is not more thinking. The distinction matters because it changes what you do next. If you're in reflective mode, stay with it. Let it work. That kind of processing produces real insight, real growth. But if you catch yourself in brooding, if you've been around this track more than twice and you're no closer than when you started, that's the signal. Not to think harder, to do something else entirely. Move, talk to someone, write it down and close the notebook. The loop doesn't close from inside the loop. Now here's the finding I want you to hold on to because most people never hear it. Studies consistently show that people who score high on measures of overthinking also score significantly higher on cognitive empathy. The ability to model another person's internal experience, to understand what they're feeling and why, to track the emotional logic of a situation with real precision. The engine running that exhausting loop at 2 a.m. is the same engine that makes someone an extraordinary friend, a perceptive colleague, the person in the room who always notices what's actually happening underneath what's being said. These things are not separate. They are the same gift, expressed in different contexts. So what you're looking at when you look at an overthinker is not a broken system. It's a highly sensitive, deeply empathic, cognitively powerful system that never received the signal that says, you can stand down now. Think about the people in your life who truly made you feel understood, not just heard, understood. The ones who knew what you meant before you finished the sentence, who noticed when something was off even when you said you were fine. Who remembered the small things you mentioned months ago and brought them up at exactly the right moment. There's a very good chance those people were overthinkers, not in spite of their exhausting inner world, because of it. The same mind that can't stop running scenarios is also the mind that genuinely sees you. That's not a coincidence. That's the same mechanism, pointed outward instead of inward. The challenge isn't the sensitivity, the challenge is learning to be on the receiving end of that same care, to turn even a fraction of that attentiveness toward yourself. Which, for most overthinkers, is the hardest thing of all. It's much easier to understand everyone else than to extend that same generosity inward. So what do you do with this? There's a concept in cognitive therapy called diffusion. It's the practice of stepping back from your thoughts, not fighting them, not analyzing them more, just observing them from a slight distance, noticing that a thought is happening without immediately climbing inside it and living there. The reframe isn't this situation is dangerous and I need to figure it out. It's, my brain is generating a concern right now. One pulls you in, the other gives you a fraction of distance, and that fraction is everything. It sounds simple, it's genuinely difficult for a mind trained to take every signal seriously, because for a long time, that was the right strategy. Every signal was worth processing. The hypervigilance earned its keep. But here's what no amount of additional thinking will ever resolve. Some knots don't loosen with more examination. They tighten. And the mind most gifted at thinking is sometimes the mind that most needs to learn that particular truth. That insight is not always at the end of another loop. Some things have to be felt and sat with and eventually released, without ever arriving at the clean resolution the analytical mind keeps searching for. That's not failure. That's the edge of what thinking can do. and in the beginning of something else. The irony is that the very act of understanding this, really sitting with it, is itself a form of that reflective rumination we talked about, the kind that actually moves something. So if you've made it this far, if you've been turning this over as you listened, connecting it to yourself, to people you know, to moments that suddenly make more sense, that's not overthinking. That's your mind doing exactly what it was built to do, just finally on something worth the effort. And that patience, for yourself, for the quietly exhausted people around you, that might be the most useful thing your overthinking mind has ever produced. Not a solution, not a conclusion, just a little more room to breathe. If this resonated with you, I'd genuinely love to know which part hit closest to home. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and if you know someone who could use this kind of reframe, send it to them. Sometimes the most helpful thing is just feeling understood. There's more on this channel about how the mind actually works, how we make decisions under stress, why we self-sabotage, what's really happening when we feel stuck. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I'll see you in the next one.